Hey, Jamie here, and welcome to Module 9, where we're going to start breaking down interview prep. Now, traditionally, most people don't like interviewing, but what my hope is for you is that after this module, you'll actually be looking forward to it. Now, the reason for that and the reason why so many people dislike interviewing is because they don't know what to say. They don't know how to approach the interview. They don't know how they should be talking about themselves. They don't know what to expect in terms of questions. And they feel sweaty or shaky or stressed or anxious or all these negative emotions that are wrapped up within interviewing. We're going to break down one, it's because of the lack of preparation or not knowing how to prepare properly, and two, because of mindset. And so module 9, we're going to get you to the position where you know exactly what to do, how to do it, and by the time you walk into the interview, you're going to look forward to it because you know you're going to crush it. So in this first part, what we're going to be breaking down is the approach and discussing especially the mindset side of the approach, but then how to actually have the conversation. So in this, we're going to understand the mindset necessary for a successful interview. We're going to understand how to use a balanced dialogue approach when you're actually going through an interview. We're going to understand how perceived value is communicated and strengthened during the interview. And perceived value is everything in the interview. Because again, if you only have 30 minutes with someone, that's not nearly enough time for them to objectively know how good you are at something. And that's often why some interview processes will actually have a case study or something like that, because sometimes they do need to see a physical work product. But in terms of perceived value, the interview is almost all perceived value. So it's super important that you build and communicate and strengthen how you're being perceived at the table or over the video chat or however the medium of communication is for the interview. And then finally, we're going to understand the 3 pillars of interview prep, which are the pre-interview outreach, preparation, and practice. All right, so now if I were to pose the question to you, how do most people approach an interview? What would you say? What initially comes to your mind as to how do most people approach an interview? So imagine that you were the one sitting at that table. 3-on-1. They're more senior than you are. They've probably been in the industry for 5 or 10 years, maybe longer. And let's say you're early to mid-career in this scenario. How would you feel? What did you do before that interview? And what are you saying? So most people believe that an interview is more, it's closer to an interrogation than a conversation. And the way that most people approach an interview is they walk in, they put their hands together, they smile politely, and they will answer any and all things asked of them. And they go in and all they do is answer questions. That's all they do. And so instead, rather than having a conversation, all they're doing is answering questions. Well, that's why most people, one, feel so uncomfortable in an interview because it's not natural to have that kind of a conversation, or I'm sorry, that kind of a, it's not even a dialogue, it's a monologue at that point. They ask a question and you respond. And very rarely do we ever have that situation in life. Whenever we're talking with another person, it's usually they ask a question, we respond, and then we ask a question, they respond, and that leads to a normal conversation. Well, most people don't have interviews like that. And so instead, the way that we want to approach it is as a normal conversation. If you walk in and have a normal conversation with your interviewer, it's going to go extremely well. They'll feel comfortable with you. You'll feel comfortable with them. And because of that level of comfort in the communication, both people, you and the interviewer, walk away saying, wow, that was a really good interview. So the other part of it is, one, having the conversation, but then two, you can't forget what you're there to do. And you're there to strategically position yourself as the solution to what they're looking for. And they're looking for someone to fill a spot with certain skills, certain types of knowledge, and abilities that are going to add value to the company or to the team. So you're positioning yourself as that solution while at the same time learning more about their potential opportunity by asking them questions. So to bring this back to the previous module where we talked about strategic positioning, this is the same. You're going to be using the same type of strategy when you're interviewing. So just like you did your strategic positioning, and then you created your personal branding documents, which were your resume, your LinkedIn, and then your cover letter, which are presenting you in a way that is saying, hey, I know this is what you're looking for. I have this to offer. I can offer these valuable skills and knowledge to you. It's the exact same strategy in the interview, except this time you're the one verbally communicating it rather than written communication. So when you're interviewing, always remember that whoever's sitting on the other side of the table from you, whether it's the recruiter or the hiring manager or the team lead, they're looking for something. And you've done the research. You know what they're looking for. They're looking for certain technical skills, certain soft skills, certain types of knowledge, and they're looking for someone who's going to fit the team culturally and someone they would love to work with. Well, because you know what they're looking for, you know, based on your personal inventory and you thinking through what are the 3 most important things they're looking for, and you already prepared that, you know the 20% that you need to focus on in the interview. You know what you need to communicate and sell. That's the strategic positioning. So, how you approach and communicate in the interview will directly affect your perceived value. And in terms of perceived value for the interview, it's the other person or the multiple people who are interviewing you. How are they perceiving you? What are they thinking about you? You could have, and the example I'd love to give is, imagine you have 10 people in a room and all of them are going to be interviewing for the same position. All 10 people could have an incredible background. So imagine they all have the same background. If only one of them knows how to approach and communicate in the interview properly and influentially, more so than the other 9 people, that's going to be the person who gets the job, who gets the position, because they know how to communicate and boost their perceived value. And so the most important thing to keep in mind when you're going in for an interview is needy is creepy. The moment that you have led the interviewer to believe that you need the job and it's almost like you're pleading or begging for the job, you've destroyed your own perceived value. And we'll talk more about this, but what you got to do is you need to walk in and you must be confident, you must be comfortable, and you must be conversational. If you're not confident, comfortable, and conversational, without you knowing, you're actually decreasing or negatively affecting your perceived value in the interview. So being perceived as needy is subconsciously communicating, I'm not valued by others, I don't have other options, and I'm definitely not your best option. And so on a personal level, think back to when you were in elementary school or middle school or high school or sometime when you were as a kid. The guy who always, desperately chased the girl never got the girl. And the girl who desperately chased the guy never got the guy. And it's the exact same way in business, because if someone is pleading or begging or believes that they need something and they almost seem desperate for it, that person does not seem valuable. And so people look elsewhere. And in business, it's the exact same way. If someone comes to you, and let's pretend you're the manager. Imagine that you're the manager and you're running a hiring process and you have 15 people that you're interviewing. Now, the first person that walks in for the interview, you ask, let's say it's a girl, so you ask her several questions and she responds extremely confidently, very clearly, very concisely. And she starts asking you several challenging questions about the position, about the company, about why you chose to work there as opposed to competitors, and several other questions that kind of put you on your heels a little bit. Well, after that conversation, you know a lot about her, and you know that, wow, that was a really talented, confident person that I think would do very well in this position. And it seemed like she had other options. It seemed like she was weighing whether or not she wanted to work here. Well, all of a sudden, she seems a lot more enticing, a lot more professional. Maybe like she's a lot more valuable and she has other options. But now let's say that a second candidate walks in. And let's say let's say a guy walks in and he's the second in line for the interview. And he comes in and visually you can immediately see he seems stressed. He seems a little anxious and he doesn't really ask good questions. And when he responds, he seems a little shaky, a little nervous, and he doesn't really sell himself at all. He just simply responds to whatever question that you ask and then sits in silence. If you have to choose between those two people, you immediately know that the first person most likely is more valuable, or at least you perceive the first candidate to be more valuable because she presented that way. Whereas the second candidate came across as, I don't have other options. I'm really, really hoping I just get this job. So the perception in an interview is so important. And it's going to be both what you actually say, what you're communicating, but it's also going to be in your tonality, your verbal tone, your verbal communication, but also in your body language, nonverbal. So how you approach the interview needs to be with a strong mindset. And for you to walk in and present yourself in that light, you must first firmly believe in yourself and your value as a service provider. So 3 things to kind of always think before an interview, and we'll talk more about how you can prep yourself and put yourself in this mindset before the interview. But 3 things. So 1, I do not need this job. The moment you walk into an interview believing that you absolutely need this position, you've already lost it, because it's going to negatively resonate in your body language, in your tonality, in your responses. You'll be stressed and shaky, and immediately it comes across as needy, which destroys your perceived value. So I know how to create unlimited opportunities for myself. By this point, you do, because you've already gone through the professional networking and you've already learned the 3 other channels for creating opportunities for yourself. So if you don't get this position that you're interviewing for, that's okay, because you already know what you'll immediately start doing afterwards in order to get another opportunity. So this is super important to have in your mind going in, that I don't need this job, but I also know how to create unlimited opportunities for myself. And then lastly is I know my value as a service provider in the marketplace. You must go in with the mindset of, I'm a business and I'm here to sell my services. I'm here to sell that I can contribute massive value to this company. All right, so now in the interview, as I've already kind of stated several times, most people go in, they're nervous, shaky, and stressed. And the reason for that is because of their mindsets. They could be incredibly talented people with all the skills, all the knowledge, and all the abilities that the interviewer is looking for, but if their mindset's off, it's not going to come through. It's not going to be communicated, and that's going to negatively affect the interviewer's perception or of that person's value, of your value. So I want to break down the 3 main reasons why people get nervous and stressed over interviews, because the moment you realize, and this is a physiological response, this is really in your body. It's a chemical reaction to what you believe and what you're thinking about. So if you remember in modules 1 and 2, when we really talked about what is the flow, or I'm sorry, module 2, mindset, we talked about purpose, values, and beliefs at the top, and that's going to determine your mindset. And your mindset is going to determine what you focus on and what you think about. And what you focus on and what you think about is going to determine your emotions and your logic. So these 3 reasons are how people are focusing, what they're focusing on and what they're thinking about. And the emotions that are resulting from that are nervous, stressed, and anxious or anxiety. All right, so 1, they think it's their best or only option. So when someone thinks that it's their only option or that they don't have anything else lined up and they might not get any other interviews, they're naturally going to get stressed and anxious and nervous for the interview. And it's because in their mind, they're worried about failing. And they're also fearing scarcity. If I lose this opportunity, I might have nothing else. Well, that's a very negative, limiting mindset. And then secondly, they're worried about being rejected. So a lot of people believe that if they get rejected from a company, that's them being told by someone else that you're not good enough, you're unworthy, you're unvaluable. And because of that, they're afraid of the negative judgment. Well, these people, when they have that mindset, they're allowing other people to tell them what they're worth. And we've already talked about that earlier on in Module 2 in mindset, as well as Module 4 in terms of personal performance. You define your own value. You define when you're successful, and you're the one who defines your value. Not a company, not someone else who's interviewing you. You walk in already knowing your value. If they can't see it, that's their problem, not yours. And so then the third point is they're worried about looking like a failure. And again, that's the fear of the self-worth or judgment. So when people worry about looking like a failure, it's primarily them worried about their friends or their family or someone else asking, hey, how did the interview go? And then they have to respond with, well, I got rejected. And again, that's a blow to their self-esteem, their ego. So in terms of overcoming these, one, they think it's their best or only option. Well, you already know how to create unlimited opportunities for yourself, which we talked about through networking, direct recruiter outreach, digital applications, creative means, as well as if you really need to, you can build a sustenance bridge and extend the period of time that you're looking for. And then secondly, worried about rejection. Well, the interview does not determine your value. You know your ability to contribute massive value. You know that you have unlimited opportunities, and you know that you don't truly need this job. You can create your own future. And then the lastly is they're worried about looking like a failure. And this is a quote that when I first heard it, it took me a while to internalize, but I absolutely love this quote. And I hope that you always keep this in mind. Lions don't care about the opinions of sheep. So you know your goals, what you want for your life, what you want for your career, the future that you're building for yourself. So if they can't see your value and they decide to reject you or not extend an offer, totally okay. That's their decision. That's not going to affect your future. That's not going to change your goals. That's going to change absolutely nothing about what you wake up to do every single day. Now, if they don't have the opportunity, that's fine. You're going to go find the opportunity elsewhere. So never ever forget that lions don't care about the opinions of sheep. Their decision does not determine your value. Only you are the one to determine what you are truly worth and what your value is professionally. So you got to annihilate the average mindset of please give me a job. It does not serve you today. It did not serve you in the past, and it absolutely will not serve you in the future. So, and this is the mindset too that most people have in the marketplace. Most people enter into interviews believing, oh my gosh, please give me this job. I really want this job. I really hope I get. They're not selling. I guarantee that they're not the ones at the table selling. And the moment you become the person selling, you differentiate yourself. And when you differentiate yourself, you're the one to get the position. So you must be strong. You must be self-sustaining. You must be self-disciplined, and you must be self-confident in yourself and your career. You're a service provider in the marketplace, and you must respect yourself as a business. Excellent businesses do not need or plead. If you think of the best entrepreneurs, the best leaders, the best CEOs, the best politicians, the best businesses, none of them need or plead. None of them beg. But instead, they're the ones who are innovators. They're the ones who work harder than anyone else. They're the ones who contribute more value than anyone else. And they also know how to negotiate and influence. They ask for what they want. So, your career is a serious business. It's your life. It's your future. And I know that I've been a little more intense in this first part of this module than the others, but this is something I'm so passionate about because I see people who have incredible skills and knowledge and backgrounds and the ability to do tremendous things in their career. But because of their lack of self-worth in terms of how they view themselves and their perceived value, then when they go into the interviews, that mindset completely destroys their opportunities. And so this is something that when you respect yourself as the business, you go in, you sell, you know your worth, and you communicate that, not only just verbally, but in body language and tonality, you will get more opportunities than most other people. and it's exciting and it's awesome once you see that. So when you believe in yourself, they will believe in you. And when you believe in your value, they will believe in your value. And when you consider and take them seriously, they will consider and take you seriously. Awesome. So if you remember, we talked about there were 3 different ways to approach a conversation. And so when we were talking about networking, we said that you want to focus on the student mindset. You want to ask a lot of questions. You want to listen intently and then ask really good follow-up questions and then show and acknowledge and appreciate their responses, information, etc. Well, in the interview, we're going to want to move a little bit to the right, but not quite to peer. So we want to be somewhere right in the middle for the interview. And the 3 words that kind of best, or the way that I think best describe kind of this middle zone between student and peer is you're pleasant, you're respectful, but you're also pretty serious. And if we were to break these 3 down, pleasant is you're friendly, you're considerate, and you're likable. You're enjoyable to talk with. It's a good conversation. And then respectful is a feeling of deep admiration for someone or something elicited by their abilities, qualities, or achievements. So you're sitting across the table from whoever the interviewer is, and you're showing them active respect for their company, for the opportunity, for their time and their willingness to interview you. So you're pleasant, you're respectful. But then the serious part is you're acting or speaking sincerely and in earnest rather than a joking or half-hearted manner. And so the way that we could kind of translate this to when you're in the interview, having a serious mindset means that you know that you're there to communicate your value and you know your own worth professionally and you're there to sell. So does this mindset make you mean, grim, or self-serving? Absolutely not. It just means that you're pleasant, you're enjoyable to talk to, you respect the person on the other side of the table or on the other side of the camera, and you're also serious about your career and your future and in communicating the fact that you can add massive value to their team. So to communicate your value in the interview, you need to have a conversation, which means that you must at the same time be interviewing them. So now the way that we can kind of visualize what the structure of that conversation might look like is in the beginning, and I'm sure that you've experienced this many times already. In the beginning, you're going to have an intro. They're going to maybe introduce themselves in a minute or 2 and be very quick about who they are, their position with the company, how long they've been there, etc. But then they're immediately going to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Can you walk us through your resume? They're going to say something that's more or less, hey, tell us about your background. Well, that's intro and small chat. But then there's going to be them asking you questions. So they're going to most likely have 10, 15, 20 questions, something prepared, and they're going to be asking you questions and then judging the quality of your responses. So after that, and this is where most people finish. That is, for most people, that's the interview. They go in, they introduce themselves, and then they answer questions. Well, they're missing half the conversation. So you're going to be able to differentiate yourself pretty well by adding on 2 other pieces. After they ask you questions, you're going to ask them questions. And not just basic questions. And what I mean by basic or a weak question is, can you tell me a little bit about your culture? Well, that's not putting you in a better position in any way possible. And that also communicates the fact that you don't know anything about their culture at all, because it's a generic question. There's no context, there's no information included in it. Anybody could ask that question. It's a weak question. So we're going to talk about powerful questions and how do you put yourself in a very strong position just through asking questions. But then the last part is you're going to pitch yourself. Every business, in order to be successful, must pitch its product or services. And you are the exact same way because you are a business. You must pitch yourself. And then throughout the conversation, the interviewers, whether it's one or multiple, they're going to be subconsciously and consciously viewing your nonverbal communication. What is your body language? What's your posture, your facial expressions, your gestures? Do you seem confident or do you seem really shaky and nervous? Are you sweating or are you smiling and vibrant? But then they're also going to be determined or perceiving you based on your verbal communication. How does your voice sound? Do you sound comfortable and conversational or do you sound stressed and shaky? And it's very, very easy to pick that up in a conversation. And all of these things together, from start to finish, from the intro all the way to your value pitch, as well as how you've been communicating verbally and non-verbally, all of this together determines your perceived value in the interview. In 30 minutes, there's a lot going on. 45 minutes, however long the interview is. There's a lot that's determining your perceived value. And we've already talked about subjective value and perceived value earlier on. So in the very beginning, there's your LinkedIn, and then you had networking, and then you built the relationships, and then eventually those relationships might have created referrals or sent in referrals for you, or you went through the application, which means that you submitted your resume, maybe your LinkedIn, a cover letter, etc. And then you had your cover letters, emails, and then eventually the interviewer has already had exposure to those things from before. So if someone referred you, the interview is already going to have a preconceived idea or an initial impression of who you are, your background, and whether or not you're a good fit. So now in the interview, you have another opportunity to create an excellent reference point, to create a lot of perceived value. And when you create a lot of perceived value in the interview, you then set yourself up for the ability to negotiate. So if you're by far, hands down, the best person that they interview, and they know that you are, head and shoulders above all the other candidates, well, you've created leverage for yourself. You have the opportunity to negotiate, because if you ask for a slightly better compensation or a better package, well, maybe they'll scratch their chins and say, oh, I don't know. But when they think about, well, if we lose this person, if we lose you, the second in line, oh, that person's not nearly as good as you. We'd love to work with you. We're not so certain about the other person. Well, they're going to be willing to pay a little bit more to make sure that you're the one who says yes. So how you interview is not just about getting the job. It's about doing so well that you actually create the opportunity for you to negotiate your offer. So we'll also discuss in terms of how to prepare and practice in parts 2 and 3. But for now, let's just dive into the 3 pillars of preparing for an interview. So the first pillar is pre-interview outreach. And really what this means is that the moment that you get an interview, whether you get a text from a recruiter or you get an email, like the moment you know for certain that, okay, a week from now or 2 weeks from now or a couple days from now, I have an interview with X company, you immediately want to start reaching out to people at that company. So you're going to reach out to people who you already know. So maybe you've already been doing networking, you've built relationships within that company. Well, you want to immediately start reaching out to all of those connections that you already have inside the company and let them know that you have the interview. And then you also want to reach out to additional cold contacts within the company. Now, the reason for that is when you reach out to people who are at the company, but you haven't yet connected with them, when you tell them, we'll go through the messages to send in order to get them to respond, but the likelihood of them responding or the overall response rate will be significantly higher than your normal networking. And the reason for that is people know that you already have the interview, which means that for them, there's no work on their part. They know that you're not going to be asking for anything other than maybe 15, 20 minutes of their time to answer several questions. So instinctively, people feel like there's no burden on their back because you already have the interview. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more. The second pillar is preparation. So actually doing the reading and the researching on the company beforehand. So you're very comfortable talking about why you're interested in the company, what the company has to offer, etc. But then also doing any personal development necessary before the interview. So maybe you need to read a book. Maybe you need to dive into YouTube and learn several concepts before the interview or something like that. But you're getting yourself prepared personally in terms of knowledge and skills. But then also you're going to prepare interview responses, powerful questions, and also prepare and practice your pitch, your value contribution pitch to the company for the position. And the last part is practicing. So you're going to practice your prepared interview responses. You're going to practice your body language and your presence, so your nonverbal communication. You're also going to practice your delivery and tonality, which is how do you sound. And then you want to make sure that you feel lively, natural, and conversational when you're talking about your background, why you believe you're a good fit, about the skills and the knowledge that you bring to the table. The more conversational you sound, the better off you'll be. And the only way to hit that level of conversational comfort is when you know what you're going to say. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in part 2, but I want to bring it up now. The reason most people say like, well, and all these other filler words in an interview or in a conversation, it's because their mind is actually thinking and they're kind of skipping. It's like their brain is skipping like a CD or something. And when you already have prepared and you've already practiced and you know what you're going to say, your mind doesn't skip because you're not processing. Instead, all you're doing is recalling. And because you're recalling, it's kind of like an actor who knows their lines cold. That actor is going to be a lot more natural, a lot more comfortable, and they might even be able to improv a little bit to make it even better. That's where we want to get you. Okay, so now in terms of the pre-interview outreach, let's focus on that. So you're going to be reaching out to the existing relationships that you already have within the company, as well as new people within the company to ask for interview advice and recommendations. Now, the reason you're doing this is because there's so much that you cannot find online. And when you're asking people for advice for the interview, you'd be blown away with how much information you're going to get. And some people may even send you resources. They might send you interview guides. You have no idea how people will help you, but by reaching out to people you've already built relationships with, as well as additional people, you're going to have so much more information going into that interview that naturally you're going to have better responses than all the other applicants, or most likely better responses than the other applicants because you have more information. So always remember the power of asking and the power of asymmetry that we talked about in module 7 for the professional networking. You have nothing to lose by asking for people's help and everything to gain. So emotionally, you might feel a little hesitant to kind of reach out to people and let them know you have an interview and then ask for their advice or for their help. But if they do get back to you, that conversation alone with that person might be the difference in terms of information of whether or not you get the position. So it's always worth reaching out. And your response rate, as I said earlier, is going to be a lot higher because people already know that you have the interview. So there's really no pressure on them at all other than helping someone out for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. And a lot of people are willing to do that. Okay, so what that message might look like for someone who you already have a relationship with, most likely through networking, is something like this. Hi, Emily. I hope all has been well since we last talked. I'm reaching out as I've received an interview with company for, and then change the date to whatever date it is. I'm very excited for the opportunity and thank you again for all your help. As I continue preparing, would you be willing to share what your experience was like interviewing with company and any advice/recommendations you might have for me? Any help ahead of my interview would be greatly appreciated. And then also you want to give them an out just like you did previously when asking for help. So the last part here is you're giving them an out. I know you have a full schedule, so if you're unable to, I completely understand. Thanks again for all your help already and enjoy the rest of your week, day, weekend, holiday, whatever. So the reason you're giving them the out again at the end of the email is if they don't feel comfortable or if they don't want to for some reason, you're not going to ruin the relationship by making them feel guilty. So it's always important to include that out at the ends. And then you sign off, best regards, your first name. Okay, so again, this is for someone that you already have a relationship with or someone you've already been networking with. Now, the second group of people that you're going to reach out to before the interview are people who you don't know yet. You haven't communicated with them yet, but they're at the company and most likely in the target position that you want. Maybe there are other people. So let's say it's a financial analyst position. Well, maybe these are financial analysts that are already at the company. Or if it's a marketing manager position, well, maybe you're reaching out to other marketing managers at the company or other people within the marketing department. So similar to how you're doing the networking, you're just going to send a connect add note message on LinkedIn. So, hi, Emily, I'm reaching out as I'm interviewing with company for, include the position title, position on the date. I'd really appreciate 10 to 15 minutes of your time to ask for your advice, recommendations, and your experience interviewing. Would you be willing to connect with me? Thank you. Your first name. Now, the reason you're setting it up with all the information in there is, one, you're letting them know that you already have the interview. First thing said, I'm reaching out as I'm interviewing. And then you're saying the company, you're saying the position, and you're giving them the date. So that way they know how urgent this is. So they might see it and say, oh my gosh, this person only is, 24 hours before they interview. Yeah, let's talk tonight. And then they send you a time afterwards. So if someone connects with you but doesn't respond to this message, simply send them a message following up and say, hey, thank you so much for being willing to connect. I'd love to ask you about your experience interviewing, any recommendations you might have, and any advice you might have, something like that. And then they'll likely respond with a time or a recommendation. Okay, so in terms of the sheet for that, I'm going to quickly pull up what the interview messages reference sheet is. And this is the sheet that's going to have the messages for all things interview. So you can see here, the first one that we have is to inform your current networking contacts of an upcoming interview. So this is for when you're going to be reaching out to people you already have relationships with, letting them know that you have an interview, and then asking for their advice, recommendations. Now, if you keep scrolling down, you're going to have the additional people, or people who you don't yet know but are already at the company, and you're sending them the connect add note message on LinkedIn. So this is what we just went through. And then if you keep going down, you're going to see here on this sheet, there's also a thank you message for after the interview. So a post-interview thank you note. And we'll talk about this later on in parts 2, 3. So I'm not going to go through that right now, as we'll go through that later. But I just want you to know that this is where it is. And then if you keep scrolling down, there's going to be the follow-up message for when you haven't heard back after an interview. So let's say that it's been a week. What do you send the interviewer or whoever, the recruiter, whoever you've been in contact with? What kind of message do you reach out to re-express your interest? Okay, so those are all the messages, and that's all we have for this part 1. And in part 2, we're going to start diving into the preparation and the practice side so that when you go in, you're confident, you know what you're going to say, it's already rehearsed, and you crush your interview so well that you've set yourself up for negotiation. So that's part 1, and I will see you in part 2.